Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is simple. We tear through a stack of sources, extract the vital knowledge, and deliver it to you as a high-octane intellectual shortcut.
And today, we're taking on, well, maybe the most colossal mind in Western history.
It feels that way. We are synthesizing the life, the art, and the frankly unbelievable scientific genius of the High Renaissance's quintessential polymath, Leonardo da Vinci.
It's not just a challenge, it's an absolute rabbit hole. I mean, we're dealing with a human being who truly defied categorization.
He really did.
A painter, a draftsman, engineer, a military architect, scientist, anatomist, a theorist. The sources consistently describe him as possessing an unquenchable curiosity.
And that phrase I love, a feverishly inventive imagination.
Yes, he was the very embodiment of the Renaissance humanist ideal.
That phrase, feverishly inventive imagination, I think that has to be our anchor, because our goal today is to move beyond the famous, the familiar portrait.
Beyond the smile.
Exactly. Beyond the smile, to understand the full revolutionary scope of his genius. We need to uncover his groundbreaking and often unpublished work in anatomy, in engineering.
Tribology, even.
Tribology, right. And most importantly, we need to address that central paradox. Why did this towering intellect, whose notes contain epoch-making discoveries, have so little direct published influence during his lifetime?
And to set the baseline, before we even jump into all that science, we have to acknowledge his artistic legacy first. It's immense.
Of course.
Historians have noted that his collective works, they represent a contribution to the subsequent generations of European artists, matched only by his younger contemporary, Michelangelo. His visual impact is just undeniable.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Let's unpack his origin story. Before we get to the genius, who was he? Where did he come from? That name, Leonardo da Vinci, it's not really a family name, is it?
No, not in the modern sense. It's more of a geographic marker. His full name was Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci.
Okay, break that down for us.
It's simple, really. Leonardo, son of Ser Piero, from the town of Vinci. So he was born in, or at least near, the Tuscan hill town of Vinci, which is about 20 miles outside of Florence, April 15th, 1452.
So the da Vinci part is just from Vinci.
Exactly. It's just a place name. And the circumstances of his birth are actually really revealing about his education and, well, his later trajectory.
How so?
He was born out of wedlock. His father was Ser Piero, a successful Florentine legal notary, a man of some standing. But his mother was a woman named Caterina di Meolipi, described in the sources as a lower-class woman.
And they never married.
No, they both married other people the year after Leonardo was born. And this social reality had profound implications for him.
Right. Because in the Renaissance, that illegitimate status, it would have closed certain doors.
It absolutely did, because he was born outside those strict societal bounds. He only received a basic, informal education. He learned to read, he learned vernacular writing, some rudimentary mathematics.
So not the important stuff for a scholar.
Critically, no. He did not receive the classical education in Latin that was, mandatory for anyone aspiring to a university degree or scholarly pursuits, especially something like law or advanced medicine.
And the theory is that his family just saw his artistic talent so early on.
That's the common theory, yes.
Mm-hmm.
They recognized his prodigious artistic talent and decided to focus their resources there with a more practical path for him.
And that lack of formal Latin, the language of European scholarship at the time, that's going to become the key intellectual roadblock for his scientific work centuries later.
A catastrophic irony. It's unbelievable. The very tools of communication he lacked were the things that would have instantly validated his revolutionary findings in the eyes of his peers.
So that background leads us straight into our first section, the artist's crucible. This is from his birth in 1452 to about 1500. And his real education, it wasn't a schoolhouse.
No, it was a workshop. The real training began when he moved to Florence around age 14 and became a garzone, which is essentially a studio boy or an apprentice.
In whose workshop?
The workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio. And you have to understand, Verrocchio was not just a painter. He was the leading Florentine master, known for his sculpture and for running this huge, almost industrial-scale operation. Leonardo spent 7 crucial years there.
And the sources are very clear. This wasn't just an art class.
Far from it. This was vocational training for a modern generalist. His 7 years there gave him these incredibly broad technical and theoretical skills.
Like what, specifically?
Well, drafting, sculpting, painting, obviously, but also chemistry for mixing pigments and mediums, metallurgy for bronze casting, mechanics for lifting these huge statues, plaster casting, woodworking.
Wow.
It was a hands-on technical institution. It set him up not just as an artist, but as an innovator who really understood how things were physically made.
And his mastery showed almost instantly. Which brings us to that legendary story of the baptism of Christ.
Ah, yes. Vasari, the famed biographer, he recounts this. Around 1472, maybe 1475, Leonardo is still a young apprentice. He collaborates with Verrocchio on this painting. Leonardo's job was to paint one of the young angels holding Jesus' robe.
And the result was staggering.
It was. His angel was deemed so superior, so alive and advanced in its technique, that Verrocchio allegedly became so disheartened that he vowed never to paint again.
Now, that's probably apocryphal, right? I mean, Verrocchio was a very busy sculptor.
It probably is, yes. But the anecdote tells us something really important about Leonardo's technique at the time.
Which was his immediate embrace of innovation.
Exactly. The majority of the baptism of Christ was painted using the older, fast-drying temper technique.
Yeah.
Leonardo used the newer, richer, more luminous oil paints for his angel. This wasn't just better drawing, it was better material science. He instantly saw and utilized his superior medium to get a level of realism and glow that just, well, it superseded his master's work.
And speaking of realism and technical superiority translating into massive commercial value, we have the bizarre and wonderful story of the Medusa shield.
Oh, this is a perfect anecdote. It shows his dedication to psychological realism, to dramatic effect. A local peasant brings a round wooden shield to Leonardo's father, asking for it to be painted.
A simple job.
A simple job. Sir Piero passes it to Leonardo. But instead of painting a standard decorative scene, Leonardo decides he wants to create something that would terrify the viewer.
He didn't just paint a gorgon from mythology.
No, he painted a monster derived from his own mind. He painted a fire-breathing, terrifying composite creature, and it was so lifelike, so detailed in its terror, that when he finally unveiled it to his father, Sir Piero recoiled in shock.
This was his first use of art as pure psychological shock.
Absolutely. And Sir Piero, being a savvy businessman, recognized the genius and the commercial value. He did not give it back to the peasant.
What did he do?
He quietly bought the peasant a cheaper, different shield, and then sold Leonardo's original creation to a Florentine art dealer for 100 ducats.
100 ducats. That was an enormous sum at the time. I mean, that's years of a skilled laborer's wages.
It confirmed his commercial appeal early on. He could generate fear, wonder, fascination, and that translated directly into high monetary value. He was a recognized master in the Guild of St. Luke by age 20.
And yet, despite all this success, despite major commissions in Florence like the uncompleted Adoration of the Magi, he just ups and leaves around 1482. He moves to Milan.
He does, and this move to Milan is perhaps the greatest indicator of his true interests. He wasn't looking for work as a painter.
He was applying for a job as a defense contractor.
That's exactly right. The letter he wrote to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, is the true aha moment for understanding this whole paradox. In this famous letter, he lists 10 points detailing his abilities.
And what's on the list?
The first 9 points relate entirely to engineering, weapon design, military architecture, and hydraulics.
So he's talking about bridges and cannons.
Yes. He details how he could build lightweight bridges, design cannons that fired unusual projectiles, create armored fighting vehicles, use hydraulic principles for siege warfare. All military tech.
And the painting, where does that come in?
It's relegated to point number 10. He writes, I can also carry out work in sculpture. And in painting, I can do everything possible, as well as any other, whoever he may be.
So he positions painting almost as a side skill, an optional extra.
He saw himself, first and foremost, as an engineer and military expert. And he even brought a musical instrument shaped like a horse's head made out of silver, just to showcase his flair for multidisciplinary craftsmanship right in the job interview.
And it worked. Sforza hired him.
He was hired for his technical knowledge. And that kicked off his first Milanese period. This period, however, did still produce some absolute masterpieces.
Right, like the Virgin of the Rocks.
Yes, commissioned for the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception. That painting is groundbreaking because of the way he handles the figures and the environment.
It has this beautiful, almost ethereal quality. It's so atmospheric.
It does. He places the Madonna and the infants, Jesus and John the Baptist, a subject known as the apocryphal meeting. It's not explicitly in the Bible, in this strange, tumbling, almost lunar landscape. It's filled with dark grottos and strange flora.
And the light is incredible.
He uses light and shadow to create this unified emotional field. The figures just emerge from the shadows, bathed in this soft internal glow. It demonstrates an early mastery of atmospheric depths that just moves far beyond the stiff linearity of his predecessors.
Then you have the lady with an ermine, a portrait that introduces dynamic movement into what was, until then, a pretty static art form.
A profound shift in portraiture. This is a painting of Cecilia Gallerani, Sforza's young mistress. And previously, portraits were often very stiff, formal profiles.
So you're just looking off to the side.
Exactly. But here, Cecilia's head is turned at an angle that contrasts with her torso. It suggests a sudden movement or a reaction. She looks as if she just heard something off canvas.
But it's a psychological moment.
It is. And the ermine she's holding is also significant. It could be a pun on her name. The Greek word galli means ermine or weasel. Or it could relate to Sforza's prestigious Order of the Ermine, which signaled virtue and purity. The innovation is that introduction of a narrative, a moment in time.
And all of that artistic triumph in Milan was meant to culminate in this one massive project, the Sforza horse, the Gran Cavallo.
The Gran Cavallo perfectly encapsulates the ambition and, well, the disappointment of his Milanese service. Sforza commissioned a massive equestrian monument for his father, Francesco Sforza.
And Leonardo actually built a model, right?
He did. He completed a 24-foot-tall clay model. It was widely admired. If it had been cast in bronze, it would have been the largest equestrian statue in history, far surpassing works like Donatello's Gattamelata.
But the irony strikes again. The engineer loses his artistic monument because of a military need.
In 1494, history intervenes. France's King Charles VIII invades Italy, and Ludovico Sforza desperately needs to defend the city. The 70 tons of bronze that Leonardo had reserved for casting the horse were diverted
To make cannons.
to manufacture cannons. The huge clay model was left exposed to the elements, and years later it was used for target practice by French soldiers. It just fell into ruin. His greatest artistic sculpture was sacrificed for the war machines he was hired to design in the first place.
A truly frustrating cycle.
A perfect example of the paradox.
Okay, moving into our second major phase, we look at how Leonardo captured emotion and revolutionized painting technique, often leaving this enduring mystery behind the canvas. Let's start with what has become the most iconic, psychologically charged religious painting ever, The Last Supper.
After the failed horse project, Leonardo dedicated himself to this commission. It's in the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria degli Grazi in Milan. He painted it from about 1495 to 1498. And he chose the most explosive, the most dramatic moment possible.
The moment of betrayal.
The immediate reaction of the disciples right after Jesus says, "One of you will betray me."
And the genius of the work is how he manages to capture 12 separate, distinct psychological reactions. He groups them into 4 triads of 3.
It's an absolute masterclass in emotion, gesture, and characterization. I mean, you see disbelief, you see anger, confusion, horror, all radiating from these groups, and all of it pointing back to this calm, isolated figure of Christ at the center. The emotional intensity is it's unprecedented.
And he did his research. He didn't just imagine these faces.
Not at all. He spent hours simply observing people in the streets, looking for faces that could represent various character types, from nobility to treachery.
That deep, almost clinical study of human emotion physiognomy is so key to his artistic method. But my favorite anecdote from this period involves a convent prior who clearly did not understand the creative process.
Yes, the poor prior. The writer Matteo Bandello, who actually observed Leonardo at work, noted that Leonardo's process was erratic.
Not a 9-to-5 job.
Definitely not. Some days he would paint continuously from sunrise to sunset, but then other days he would just stand there and stare at the work for hours, maybe add a single brushstroke or sometimes not paint at all for 3 or 4 days. And the prior, who thought painting should be a steady job, hounded Leonardo mercilessly.
And Leonardo, being Leonardo, turned this bureaucratic irritation into a pretty serious threat.
He did. He sought the Duke's intervention to stop the prior's harassment. He explained that he was troubled over finding the perfect face for Christ and equally the perfect face for the traitor, Judas.
And then he dropped the bombshell.
He told the Duke that if he could not find a suitable model for the villain soon, he would be forced to use the face of the prior.
I love that.
And according to Vasari, that little threat secured him peace to work on the mural for the remainder of the commission.
That detail about the non-continuous painting and his desire for perfect realism, it also hints at the profound tragedy of his choice of medium for The Last Supper.
It is perhaps the biggest artistic miscalculation of his entire career. He needed a medium that allowed for slow, deliberate blending and correction. True fresco, Painting on wet plaster doesn't allow for that. You have to work fast.
So he experimented.
He did. He used tempera mixed with oil on a dry plaster surface that he'd prepared with gesso and pitch. But this technique was completely unstable, especially in Milan's humid climate.
And the consequence was a disaster.
A profound tragedy, absolutely. The sources confirm that within 100 years, the painting was already described by one viewer as completely ruined. The paint was just flaking off the wall.
And yet it's still the most reproduced religious painting ever.
Which just speaks to the sheer power and perfection of the underlying composition. It's that good.
Speaking of achieving nuanced, perfect effects, this brings us to Leonardo's key painting innovation. It's the signature technique you see on his most famous work, sfumato.
Sfumato. It literally translates from the Italian as smoky, or like smoke. And it's a technique of creating this subtle, almost imperceptible gradation of tone or shading. It allows colors and tones to blend into one another without any distinct outlines.
So it softens the edges?
It softens edges and creates an elusive, misty quality. It's not just shading, though. It's really an optical illusion designed to trick the eye.
And it perfectly complements his study of physiognomy.
Exactly, his lifelong study of how the human face registers fleeting, complex emotion. By blurring the lines around the eyes and the mouth, he leaves the exact nature of the subject's expression ambiguous. It forces your eye and your brain to constantly reevaluate what you're seeing.
And all of this converges on the Mona Lisa.
The Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda, is the absolute culmination of this technique. Its status as the world's most famous individual painting rests entirely on that famous, elusive, and mysterious smile.
And that mystery is sfumato.
It's pure sfumato. The subtle, deeply shadowed corners of the mouth and the eyes prevent you, the viewer, from ever being able to definitively say whether she is smiling or not.
Right. If you stare at her eyes, the smile seems to vanish, and if you stare at her mouth, it reappears. It's a kinetic painting, even though it's completely static.
And beyond that psychological effect, the painting is a technical marvel. The dress is unadorned, which ensures all your attention is focused on the hands and the face. The background is this dramatic, fluctuating, desolate, almost alien landscape with winding paths and water.
And the brushstrokes are invisible.
That's the crucial part. The sources point out the extreme smoothness of the application of oils. They're blended so perfectly that the brushstrokes are virtually invisible. Vasari, in awe, said the quality of the painting would make even the most confident master despair and lose heart.
Yet, perhaps the greatest irony of his entire painting career is that the most famous work in the world may have been left technically unfinished due to a physical disability.
This is one of the most important biographical details confirmed by the sources. Leonardo kept working on the Mona Lisa for years. He carried it with him to France. But crucially, we have a medical record from October 1517 confirming a paralysis of his right hand at age 65.
And this is why he stopped painting major commissions.
The sources explicitly suggest this is the reason. It's why pieces like the Mona Lisa were left technically incomplete. While he remained proficient with his left hand for writing, the fine motor skills required for that invisible blend, that perfect sfumato, they were compromised.
From the meticulous perfection of the Mona Lisa, we pivot to the sheer, magnificent mess of his mind as captured in his drawings. These journals aren't just art, they're the complete visual index of his intellectual life.
He was a prolific draftsman to an almost unbelievable degree. He amassed a staggering 13,000 pages of surviving notes and drawings.
And just think how much must have been lost.
Exactly. The total volume of his recorded thought is unimaginable. And these journals contain everything from grocery lists to detailed designs for war machines, philosophy, optical studies, and of course, anatomy.
And among these thousands of pages, we find iconic works that are known globally.
Yes, the instantly recognizable Vitruvian Man, which is a study of human proportions based on the Roman architect Vitruvius's theories and his thousands of detailed anatomical studies, including the scientific drawing of a fetus in utero.
These aren't just art or science, are they? They're a fusion.
They're the fusion of both disciplines. He used the perfection of artistic technique to serve the accuracy of scientific observation.
And sometimes that observational impulse took a very dark, detached turn, which is exemplified by that macabre sketch of the hanged man.
That sketch is a chilling illustration of his purely clinical eye. In 1479, after the Pazzi conspiracy, an attempt by the Pazzi family to assassinate Lorenzo de' Medici, a man named Bernardo Baroncelli was hanged in Florence.
And Leonardo went to watch.
He went and meticulously documented the body. He recorded every detail of the man's appearance, including the precise colors and condition of the robes the condemned man wore when he died. It was pure, detached scientific record-keeping. He was treating a fresh corpse as just another object to be drawn and cataloged.
That cold, clinical eye he used for artistic realism, even when observing a hanged criminal, leads us directly into the core of our paradox. Leonardo, the unrecognized scientist and engineer. This is the part of the deep dive that requires the most attention, because while the world worships the painter, the scientist was truly centuries ahead of his time.
If we look at his scientific methodology, one characteristic is paramount. His approach was purely empirical and observational. He believed only in what he could see, describe, and accurately depict. He was driven by a burning desire to reverse engineer creation.
And this is where his earlier lack of formal education becomes a major liability that stifled the dissemination of his work.
Precisely. Because he lacked formal education in Latin and advanced mathematics, the requisite languages for scholarly communication in the Renaissance, his scientific work was largely dismissed or simply unreadable by contemporary academics. They judged the language of the messenger, not the brilliance of the message.
And the sheer magnitude of his intellectual leap is confirmed by this stunning statement found in his notes. Il sole non si muove.
The sun does not move.
That is profound. He was anticipating the heliocentric model, which wouldn't gain wide acceptance until decades after Copernicus's death and decades after Leonardo wrote that down.
It confirms he was thinking radically beyond the established Ptolemaic Earth-centric view. But nowhere was his scientific genius more revolutionary than in anatomy.
Let's just contextualize this for you listening. What was the accepted state of medical knowledge in Europe around 1500?
Medicine was still overwhelmingly dominated by Galenic theory. This was based on the writings of Galen, a Roman physician who lived over 1,300 years earlier. And Galen's work was based largely on the dissection of animals, like pigs and monkeys, because human dissection was often taboo.
So it was based on faulty data, and the prevailing theory was the four humors.
Yes, the system of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Disease was seen as an imbalance of these.
So when Leonardo began dissecting human corpses, he wasn't just drawing, he was tearing down the foundations of 1,300 years of accepted medical practice.
Absolutely. He was granted permission to dissect human corpses at hospitals in Florence, Milan, and Rome, and he ultimately examined around 30 bodies in great detail. He even collaborated with the anatomy professor Marcantonio della Torre around 1510. His goal was to publish an anatomical treatise.
And the scale of his output is astounding, even if it was never published.
He generated over 240 incredibly detailed drawings and wrote roughly 13,000 words toward this treatise. These weren't sketches. These were blueprints of the human body. They provided a view of internal organs, muscles, and bones that had never before been accurately rendered.
Okay, let's dive into the groundbreaking, crucial medical discoveries he made that went completely unrecognized for centuries.
Well, he fundamentally redefined several branches of medicine. For instance, he prefigured the entire field of biomechanics by studying the body as a machine.
A machine of levers and pulleys?
Exactly. He analyzed the skeletal structure not just as a static frame, but as a system of levers, pulleys, and forces. He studied the forces exerted by specific muscles in movement.
And what about specific diseases? He was able to identify them.
This is where he truly leaps ahead. He was the first person to accurately define both atherosclerosis, the hardening and narrowing of arteries due to plaque buildup and liver cirrhosis.
You have to remember, in the 1500s, illness was understood through this vague imbalance of humors.
And Leonardo was observing and accurately documenting the pathology of specific organ failures. He was recognizing the physical changes that defined a disease, not just the symptoms.
He also directly refuted the ancient wisdom of Galen and the whole humor theory.
He did. Galenic medicine believed that the cerebral spaces and major organs contain these theoretical humors. Leonardo's detailed documentation, based on actual human dissection, proved that the humors were not contained in the cerebral ventricles or major organs as they believed. He established the true structure of the cerebral ventricles.
And that leads us to his experimental techniques, which are really the hallmark of modern science. He didn't just look. He built models to prove his concepts.
His experimental ingenuity is just phenomenal. To map the true geometry of the cerebral ventricles, he wasn't satisfied with simple drawings.
What did he do?
He injected melted wax into the brain's internal cavities, the ventricles, and then allowed the wax to solidify. It created a perfect, exact three-dimensional cast of those structures.
So he could literally hold the internal architecture of the human brain in his hands. That's an enormous leap in visualization.
His visualization married to proof. And he did the same thing with the circulatory system. He made the groundbreaking observation that the heart defined the circulatory system. So to study the aortic valve, which controls blood flow out of the heart, he built a working model.
A model of an aorta.
He constructed a transparent glass aorta and then used water mixed with grass seed to visually observe the circulation patterns as the water passed through the valve.
He was using water flow and seed particles to replicate and study hemodynamics hundreds of years before anyone else. This is pure physics applied to biology.
And that application of physics brings us to his engineering ingenuity. He's credited with producing the first form of modern technical drawing. He innovated the exploded view technique to represent complex internal components by showing them separated but aligned.
A standard practice in engineering today.
Absolutely. He generated over 5,000 pages of these precise technical designs in his codices.
We often hear about his most fantastical ideas, the things that were truly impossible in the 15th century.
The visionary designs, yes. He sketched several concepts for flying machines. One was the ornithopter, designed to mimic the flapping motion of a bird's wings. Another was the helical rotor, often called the aerial screw.
The forerunner to the helicopter?
The concept is similar, yes, a rapidly turning coil. But the sources note that while the principles were sound, the necessary materials science, the lightweight engines, the metallurgy, they were centuries away.
But he also designed functional, military, and civil technology.
Absolutely. He designed an armored fighting vehicle, a forerunner of the tank, which was powered by men pushing cranks. He designed complex hydraulic pumps and various reversible crank mechanisms. He even designed a steam cannon.
And some very practical, unheralded inventions.
Yes, things that likely entered manufacturing without his name attached. An automated bobbin winder for textile production, for example, and a specialized machine for testing the tensile strength of wire. He wasn't just dreaming big, he was improving manufacturing efficiency.
His civil and military engineering was highly sought after, especially when he was serving Cesare Borgia.
In 1502, he was hired as Borgia's chief military engineer and architect. And he didn't just design machines. He mapped terrain strategically. He created these incredibly sophisticated, accurate town plans and strategic maps, like the famous plan of Imola,
which gave Borgia a comprehensive, modern strategic overlay of the territory.
It was reconnaissance elevated to an art form. Later, in Florence, he worked on a major infrastructure scheme with none other than Niccolo Machiavelli to divert the flow of the Arno River, though that project ultimately failed.
Okay, now let's address the most jarring example of this whole paradox, the laws of friction. This is foundational physics that he wrote down in a notebook in 1493, only for the world to ignore it for 200 years.
This is the ultimate example of lost intellectual capital. The study of friction, wear, and lubrication is called tribology, and it is fundamental to all mechanical engineering. You cannot build a reliable machine without understanding friction. Leonardo first articulated the core laws of sliding friction in 1493.
So, what conceptually did he figure out?
He discovered two major laws. First, that the force of friction is proportional to the load pressing the two surfaces together. Simple enough. But second, and this is the counterintuitive part for his time, he realized that the friction force is largely independent of the apparent area of contact between the two surfaces.
So if you have a heavy block, whether it's resting on its wide side or its narrow side, the force needed to slide it horizontally is the same.
Exactly. It defies common sense. And it was a revolutionary insight that stemmed directly from his engineering design work and his attempt to prove that perpetual motion was impossible, which he also correctly dismissed.
And he wrote all this down.
He provided detailed drawings and calculations, but because they were locked in his private notes, written in mirror script, they had zero impact on the progression of mechanics.
200 years later, they were independently rediscovered.
Yes. The laws were independently rediscovered and codified in 1699 by a French physicist, Guillaume Amonton, whose name is usually associated with them today. Leonardo was retrospectively named the first of the men of tribology, but that recognition came hundreds of years too late to help the Renaissance.
Just think about the entire epoch of the scientific revolution that could have been accelerated if that fundamental knowledge of mechanics had been available in 1500.
It's staggering to contemplate.
Moving on to Section 4, the final years of Leonardo's life saw him transition from the constantly hustling, struggling court artist and engineer who was often paid late into a life of comfortable, internationally recognized genius.
That's right. After the French overthrew Ludovico Sforza in 1500, Leonardo fled Milan. And after a brief stint serving Cesare Borgia, his final major move came in 1516. He was invited to France by the young King Francis I,
Who was a great admirer.
a huge admirer. Francis I offered him the use of the manor house Clos-Lucé near the royal residence, and the patronage was substantial. He was finally rewarded appropriately.
He was given a massive pension, right?
An enormous pension, 10,000 scudi annually. It made him immensely wealthy and secure.
And Francis I treated him not just as an employee, but as a friend, a national trophy. He said he considered himself honored to converse with such a great man and frequently visited him at Clos-Lucé.
That close relationship led to one last major demonstration of his engineering flair, didn't it? The mechanical lion.
It's a spectacular tale. It fuses art, spectacle, and mechanics. For a pageant honoring Francis I, Leonardo engineered a complex mechanical lion. The lion walked toward the king.
On its own.
On its own. And upon being struck by a wand, its chest cavity opened to reveal a cluster of fleur-de-lis, the symbol of the French monarchy. It was engineering used for pure theatrical delight. It's fascinating how his public life was full of spectacle and patronage, yet his personal life remains largely veiled in ambiguity. We only really glimpse it through his relationships with his students.
His voluminous notebooks scarcely touch on his private life. But we do know he had these intense, lifelong relationships with his pupils. Francesco Melzi was his favorite student and the principal heir to his artistic and scientific legacy. He treated him like a son.
And Melzi was the one who tried to organize all the notes after he died.
He was. He collected and organized and treasured the thousands of scattered pages after Leonardo's death.
And then there was Salah. The sources portray him as a complete menace, yet he stayed for 30 years.
Salah. His real name was Gian Giacomo Caproti da Oreno. He was Leonardo's apprentice for 3 decades, and the records are hilarious. Leonardo kept a detailed list of Salah's misdemeanors, labeling him a thief, a liar, stubborn, and a glutton.
What did he do?
He stole money, pigments, expensive silks. Yet Leonardo remained profoundly attached to him. Talk about a high-maintenance apprentice.
That deep, complex attachment to both the faithful Melzi and the rogue Salah is telling. It also brings us to the historical discussion surrounding his sexuality.
It has been a subject of historical speculation since the 16th century, though it's definitively unknowable. We know of the sodomy charges brought against him in 1476 in Florence, which were ultimately dismissed for lack of sufficient evidence.
And his relationships with his pupils were described as very close.
Melzi himself described his relationship with Leonardo in a letter to Leonardo's brothers as loving and passionate. Furthermore, art historians have often noted the pervasive themes of androgyny and delicate beauty in some of his later works, like St. John the Baptist.
Turning to his final end, we mentioned the paralysis earlier. He died in France in 1519.
Leonardo died at Clos-Lucé on May 2, 1519, at age 67, likely from a stroke. While the famous image of King Francis I holding him in his arms as he died has been immortalized by artists, it's generally considered a romantic legend invented by Vasari.
Why is that?
Francis I's movements were documented elsewhere that day. It's a nice story, but probably not true.
But the clinical fact of the right-hand paralysis remains crucial to understanding his final artistic output.
It's absolutely essential. That record from October 1517 confirming the paralysis explains the cessation of his major painting projects. It explains why masterpieces like the Mona Lisa may have been left technically unfinished. He remained left-handed for writing, which explains his famous mirror image cursive. But the specific fine motor skills needed for that inviolable blending were gone.
And his death didn't bring quiet repose. Thanks to the subsequent turmoil of the French Revolution, his remains became part of an enduring mystery.
He was buried in 1519 in the Collegiate Church of St. Florentin at the Château d'Amboise. But tragically, the church was almost completely demolished during the French Revolution, and the site was looted, scattering the contents of the graves.
However, there was a concerted effort in the mid-19th century to find and identify his remains.
Yes, in 1863, an excavation was led by Arsène Houssaye. They found a partially complete skeleton presumed to be his.
Presumed based on what?
A few small clues. A bronze ring, fragments of white hair, and stone fragments bearing inscriptions that formed Leonardo's Vinci. While the identification is still debated, the height, 5.7 feet, was questioned, but later deemed appropriate. There is one compelling detail related to his physical limitation.
What's that?
The skeleton's right arm was found folded over the head, a posture that some experts speculate might correspond to his documented right-hand paralysis, suggesting a physical habit or deformity caused by the stroke.
And the effort to conclusively identify those bones continues into the modern era using genetics.
Exactly. Modern science is attempting to achieve authentication through DNA testing. They're comparing samples from his work, from descendants of his half-brother, and from the remains themselves. And crucially, in 2021, researchers successfully located and documented 14 living male relatives, which provides a key genetic link to aid in the authentication of those disputed bones.
It's amazing. Even 500 years later, the world's fascination has never diminished. He remains, without question, the universal genius.
Unquestionably. I mean, crowds still queue in the Louvre in droves to see the Mona Lisa. The museum famously refused to move it for their massive 2019 retrospective because of visitor demand and the value of his work. Just look at the staggering $450.3 million for the Salvator Mundi in 2017. It shows his enduring cultural power. We are still studying, translating, and analyzing his writings today.
That brings us to the close of this incredible deep dive into the mind of Leonardo da Vinci. We've explored his early genius in Verrocchio's workshop, his mastery of the psychological realism in The Last Supper and Mona Lisa, and his absolutely revolutionary scientific work in anatomy, engineering, and physics.
And the key takeaway, the paradox we set out to explore, is that profound contrast between the world-famous painter and the scientific pioneer who is virtually unknown to his contemporaries in his non-artistic pursuits.
He was the first to define specific diseases like atherosclerosis and liver cirrhosis.
The first to use physical models like wax ventricles and glass aortas to understand human function. The first to articulate the physical laws of sliding friction.
And yet, all of that knowledge was locked away in mirrored cursive in those 13,000 pages of notes. Many intended for a great encyclopedia, but they were never organized or published. The potential acceleration of the history of science and engineering was completely lost to the world for 2 full centuries.
His knowledge was arguably the greatest single collection of discovery in Europe at the time, but its immediate impact on civilization was negligible. It was negligible because he, or those who inherited his work, kept it locked away, hidden from the world of academia.
So here's our final provocative thought for you to take away. If 13,000 pages of epoch-making discovery, from the laws of friction to the true nature of the circulatory system, can disappear for 200 years, what major scientific or engineering revolutions are locked away today, waiting for the right person to simply open the drawer and publish?
Does genius truly depend only on creation? Or does the real value of revolutionary knowledge ultimately rest entirely upon its communication and its dissemination?
It forces us to confront the fact that having the greatest possible knowledge, if it's isolated, is useless to humanity.
And the paradox of Leonardo is that the genius who saw farther than anyone was perhaps the worst communicator of his own vision.
An incredible mind and an incredibly dense deep dive. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.